Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Shimmer Read. Today I'll be doing my March wrap up. So before I get started with all of the books I read, my stats, etc., if you are new to this channel, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below as well as hit the notification bell. But March was a fantastic month for me. It was by far my best reading month so far for the year. I read a total of 15 books, and from those 15 books I read 6,630 pages. And then in terms of my ratings, I gave one book 2 stars, I gave 5 books 3 stars, I gave 2 books 3.5 stars, I gave 4 books 4 stars, I gave 1 book 4.5 stars, and then I gave 2 books 5 stars. So primarily it's been a good month. Most of my books I read were 3.5 stars and up. I do have quite a few 3-star books, which is middle of the lane for me, but overall like really good month for me in terms of quality, in terms of quantity. So very happy overall. So the first book I want to discuss is The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, which I gave 3 stars. This book follows a girl called Romy, where ever since her parents' tragic death on the spaceship, she is now alone, traveling far away from Earth to actually colonize a second Earth. And she tries to stay upbeat, but she really only has herself as company, as well as messages with her therapist to overcome her anxiety. One day NASA actually lets her know that there will be another spaceship joining her, and she is very excited for this because this means company. And so she starts exchanging messages with the captain of the new ship. His name is Jay, and they slowly start to become friends. However, before long, she soon finds out that there is something sinister going on. I honestly have mixed feelings about this book because I really liked the build-up and how the author portrayed everything, especially coupled with Romy's anxiety, but I feel like the writing was just a bit off for me. I felt like there was so much redundancy with the writing that it made me very irritated and annoyed with Romy's character, and I don't think that was actually the author's intention. And for some reason I also kept getting like catfish vibes because there's no voice messages, there's no video messages, because they're transmitting messages, you know, through space. We're just like thousands, like light years away from each other, so they can only send like text messages to each other to conserve like energy, whatever it is. So because of that, I felt like I kept getting like catfish vibes. I'm like, is he really say who he is? Like, what if it's a girl? What if it's an old man? Like, you don't really know. Like, it seems like he's supposed to be in his like early 20s, like early mid 20s, and she's like 16 years old or something. So like it's already a bit of an age gap there. But what if he's older? Like I kept getting like weird catfish vibes. And not only that, but like I just felt like the way how it was portrayed too just felt a little bit off to me, because you have to consider the fact that these messages takes months to actually get to the other person, and the other person has to respond, and it would take months back. So it's literally double the amount of time for them to exchange messages. So for example, if it takes like 6 months for the message to actually even arrive to Romy, it'll take another 6 months, maybe a little bit less because he's traveling closer to her, for it to arrive back to him. So the messages they're sending each other, it's like it's not going to be coherent in some sense, because it's literally like they are like like the way how like timeline works, it's not going to be linear, because whatever he responds to her, she's going to respond to it like a year later. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like it just felt off to me in terms of the timeline, and that I felt like because of that, it also made the friendship develop a little bit unrealistic. And like the only reason why I like kept going on with it, I felt like it would kind of work, is because she's very lonely. Like, she's literally by herself. I'm not sure if Jay's by himself. It seems like he's by himself as well. So like because of stuff, I'm like, okay, I'm willing to kind of like overlook this, but in reality though, it's still very off to me. Like, their messages are not going to make sense to each other. Who's going to remember a message that they sent to each other like a year in advance, like a year ago? Like I'm not going to remember like the exact message I sent to Romy a year ago, because there was also messages where like he asked her like, oh, like I need your help with, you know, equation, like because you're very smart, can you help me with this? And by the time she gets a response to him, it's like a year later, and I'm like, how is he going to remember? Like, is this even going to be helpful for him at this point? Like, probably not, you know? So it's like the messages that they write to each other, it's just, it doesn't really make a lot of sense sometimes. But overall though, I actually did really feel connected with the main character in terms of her anxiety issues, and how she was like she only had her own thoughts as company because, you know, she was all by herself. She was constantly scared of what had happened to the astronauts, what happened to her parents, and, you know, she's a young girl. She's frightened all by herself on this galaxy. Like, she has no one really there. So she's very vulnerable to a lot of, like, you know, mental things that's happening, and I did feel very connected with her, and I felt like this is something that I can relate to as a female. Like, obviously I'm not in the same situation, but there's certain things that she had to deal with that was like this. I remember feeling like this, you know, before. So overall I do have mixed feelings, but I feel like I liked what the author was trying to do here. Then this next book that I read is Little Monsters, which I gave 3 stars. This book basically follows Casey, where she is the new girl in town, where she moved in with her father and basically gains a whole new family. And she suddenly becomes close friends with Bailey and Jade from school, and the 3 of them start to do everything together until one day they seemingly decide to cut her out by not inviting her to the biggest party of the year. However, before she can actually confront them, she finds out that Bailey actually never came home the night before, and now obviously everyone is trying to find out what actually happened and if she's okay. I was expecting so much from this book, but this was not the amazing read that I expected. I also had just finished another YA thriller, which I will talk about later in this video, and that was freaking phenomenal, and this book just seems so dull and predictable in comparison. And while the book kept me interested enough to actually finish it, the reveal at the end was not very shocking. But while the culprit itself was not shocking, there was another alongside like plot twist that occurred that was very shocking, and I felt like it gave a lot of depth to the story, and that's the reason why I still gave this book 3 stars. And not only that, but there's also Bailey's POV that's scattered throughout this book, and her POV was honestly so fascinating because you see a completely different side to her than is actually presented, that other people see. So it is very shocking. And the other thing I want to mention is that there's a bunch of like weird incest mentions in this book that just felt so off, and it just made me really uncomfortable. So I don't know, like I just felt like overall this book was just not the greatest. Then this next book I picked up is Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which I gave 4 stars. This book follows a young girl, her name is Shinga, where she grew up isolated, and all she has for company is her mother, who is the moon goddess, as well as their maid. One day her magic flares and the imperial guards show up. She finds out that her mom has actually been imprisoned on this moon this entire time, and that her own existence is actually a secret from the entire celestial kingdom. However, due to circumstances, she finds herself in the celestial kingdom now, and she must disguise her identity. She also seizes an opportunity where she can learn alongside the crown prince, so she can actually master her magic as well as her archery skills. And as the story progresses, she must find a way to save and free her mother while also embarking on some perilous quest, and in the meantime dealing with the passionate romance with the crown prince. This book actually started off very slow for me, and there were so many times when the main character made some very frustrating decisions. However, the story itself was very lush and beautiful. I loved how it spanned over many years, so it made her journey and her quest much more realistic. Plus, I felt like as the years spanned, you see her, you know, gain more of her personality, more of her characters, like her character develops more, so I became more invested with her as the years went by. I also liked how even though the romance was a key plot, it never deterred me or interfered with the main plot, which is her trying to save her mother. And there were also so many plot twists in this book that I'm really hoping that the next book, which is also the finale for this duology, will explore more, because even though the book ended very well, like things wrapped up very well, there is this one character that I'm hoping I will see more, and that perhaps the second book / finale will cover more of that person. So unfortunately this was not the 5-star read that I was expecting, but I still think it's a really solid read and definitely recommend this one. Then this next book that I picked up is The Natural History of Dragons by Mary Brennan. This book I gave 3 stars. It follows Lady Trent, where she is a young woman before she becomes the renowned dragon naturalist of the world. This is the first book in the a series where she had just gotten married and her husband are now off to see their first dragon in its habitat. This was interesting, but I don't know, I heard so much about the series, like so much love for the series, that I expected more. Not only that, but I do typically love all things dragons. Like I love dragon lore, I love like retellings featuring dragons, I love dragons in general. They're one of my favorite mythical creatures, but I was not a huge fan of Trent's narrative. And the thing is, I did listen to some audiobooks, so I don't know if that kind of changed my perspective or if that, like, you know, changed things a little bit, but I don't know, I was just not the biggest fan of this book. Oh, and one more thing is that the ending, there's this like one sad thing that happens which I was not expecting at all, and I don't know, I felt like this person was one of the main reasons why I actually continue on with the book, because I actually like this character. And then so when this like disappointing thing happened with this character, I was like, okay, well, I'm not so sure anymore. So unfortunately, basically what I'm trying to say is I would not be continuing on with the series. Okay, then this next book that I picked up is Project Hail Mary, which I gave 5 stars. So the world is suddenly in high alert state because they have discovered this situation where the sun's energy is quickly becoming depleted, and that will in turn make the whole earth turn into the ice age. So the whole world's leader is coming together to figure out what exactly is going on and how can they go about in preventing this from happening. They end up enlisting the help of a science teacher. His name is Ryland Grace, due to a thesis that he wrote many years ago where he basically stated that life can survive without water. However, due to circumstances, he now finds himself being woken up on a spaceship by himself where his crewmates are actually dead, and he has no memory in terms of why he's there and what he's doing there. So now he's trying to just piece together what is happening, what's going on, while also being the one person who can save the world. This was such a fun read. I feel like for me, the difference between a 4-star and a 5-star read is for me to invoke a lot of emotions, like whether I am laughing a lot or just giggling a lot throughout the book, like crying, which probably is less likely, or just like having a really good time. I feel like that's the difference, because I was laughing throughout this book, I was just smiling throughout it. Like I had such good energy while reading this book because it was just fun, it was entertaining, and that's why I gave this book 5 stars. And while it was heavy on the science, I think the author did a really good job of just presenting it so anyone can understand what's going on. And like I said, there was just a surprising amount of comedy throughout this book. Like just the banter and the dialogues were just so entertaining that I was so invested with the story. And the thing is, that's all I can really say about this book, because about 1/3 of the way through there's a major plot twist / spoiler, and I feel like once you know what this is, it will change your like expectations for this book completely. So I don't want to like share what it is, because I feel like when this was revealed, I was shook, and I felt like this made the book so much more entertaining. So basically, check it out if you haven't already. It is fantastic. Don't be deterred by all the science terms and everything. It is really fun. All right, then this next book that I picked up is 100 Suns, which I gave 4 stars. This is set in the 1930s in Indochine, where it follows a young woman called Jessie, where she had just moved there with her family to oversee the French colony as well as their rubber fields. Indochine is the key to her family's prosperity, or to her husband's family's prosperity, and she will do everything that she can to make sure that they will survive, that it will prosper, as well as hide the secrets from her past. However, she soon becomes acquainted with a young French woman called Marcel, who is apparently hiding her own secret agenda, where she is actually trying to overthrow the French authority and return Indochine back to its people. And so of course the two of them soon becomes at odds with each other due to their very differing plans. This was such a fascinating read. First of all, I didn't even know much about this period, so this was all new to me, and I was so invested with the characters and the story. I also love the writing, as it was very descriptive and I could picture everything that was happening in my head. But the only reasons why I didn't give this book 5 stars is because I felt like there were a few things that the main character did that was just a bit iffy to me, as well as the flashbacks that weren't necessarily clear, because I did listen to this on audiobook, and I felt like even though there were like timestamps, I'm not going to remember like which date, which month, which year it is every single time it's happening. And so when I was listening to audiobook, I didn't even realize that there was a significant like flashback. I just thought it was like a linear, like, oh, you know, maybe a few days later, etc. But that's not the case, and so that made it a little bit confusing on my end. But I think that's also just because I listened to an audiobook. All right, then this next book that I picked up is The Heart Principle, which I gave 2 stars. I did talk about this book a little bit more in detail in one of my reading vlogs, so I'll link that above and down below in case you want to check that out. But this book basically follows a girl called Anna, where she experienced unexpected fame, where she now has the pressure to meet people's expectations due to the fact that one of her videos became viral. And suddenly her longtime boyfriend wants to have an open relationship where he can see other girls, and so as a revenge she goes on all these dating apps to seek one-night stands. So she ends up meeting Quan via one of these dating apps, and the two of them start to hit it off, and what was supposed to be a one-night stand turned into something a lot more. Okay, I was not a fan of this book at all. I had read the previous 2 books. They were super cute, super romancy. I assumed that this was on the same line, but this is not really a romance book, and I felt like that was the main part that was very deceiving. This book was actually super serious, super sad, with very little romance actually involved. The beginning definitely had some romance vibes where they're meeting up, they're, you know, having their conversations, but about like a quarter, 1/3 of the way through, it completely shifted tones where something happens to Anna's family, and now she is just in this like very intense mental state while also dealing with this sudden incident in her family. Also, she had a horrible sister, so that didn't help things at all. And like at some point, I don't even know why Quan was still there, because the romance wasn't developing at all. Like he was there like just clinging onto her for like no apparent reason. And I felt like the previous 2 books actually went into Quan a little bit more than his own book did. That, I don't know, I just felt like he didn't get the attention that he deserved based on his like previous, you know, like relationships and the attention that he had from the previous books. I don't know, I just felt like he just didn't get what he deserved. So honestly, this book was not it, and it's just so different from the previous books. So I don't know, like I was not a fan. I was expecting something super cute and fluffy. This book was not it. Then this next book that I picked up is When We Left Cuba, which I gave 4 stars. This book follows a woman called Beatrice, where she and her family escapes from Cuba and they now move to Florida, and this is all due to the Cuban Revolution, and now she's basically trying to reclaim the life that she lost. Soon she gets caught up in an affair with an engaged senator, as well as the Cuban American politics, while all trying to figure out how this can benefit her so she can return to Cuba, to her rightful home. This was actually a really fascinating read. I was constantly impressed with Beatrice and the decisions that she had to make with the options that were provided to her, considering that she was not white and living in a country that wasn't even hers. Plus, she was a woman. She was also so dedicated to the cause of returning Cuba to its people and not to its dictator, and she was just willing to undergo so much to obtain this goal. The writing was also really astounding, and I just felt so connected with the characters, like so invested with all of them. So if you're looking for a really good historical fiction, and definitely check this one out. Alright, then this next book that I picked up is the amazing YA thriller that I mentioned previously, and that is Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This book I gave 5 stars. So this continues after the first book, where Pip is now, you know, wrapping up what had happened in the first book, and she's now released a whole podcast series so people can find out for themselves, as well as continuously bring updates in terms of the court case that was happening around the first book. And at this point, she has basically retired from being a detective due to what had happened and the strain that went on her during that time. However, she soon finds herself involved with yet another case when a close friend of hers, his brother, actually ends up disappearing. And at first she tries to leave to the police, but they make it very obvious to her that he is very low priority to them, mainly because he is in fact an adult, so he can make his own decisions. So of course she decides to take matters to her own hands. This book was absolutely amazing, and I highly recommend the audiobook version. And I feel like because of the whole podcast, it made the whole book just seem so like it just enhanced so much for this book. The plot was so tense, and there were constantly so many things that were being revealed, and I liked Pip a lot because she was such a fascinating character, especially with when you see her like variety of skills, where in the previous book she was following leads from a dead, like a long dead like cold case, and this book she's literally finding pieces for a live missing person case. And I don't know, like it's just so fascinating to read about her and her character and her detective sleuthing skills. The only thing I wish was more in this book was actually Ravi Singh and being more of an active player, because I felt like even though he was there a few times in this book, he was primarily focused on the court case, so you actually didn't really see much of him. You only see him when he came around to kind of update in terms of what was happening, because he was there, you know, every day, or whenever they had a court case going on, he went there to, you know, to listen in and take notes and everything. And so he was not involved with this new case at all. And the one thing I really miss about the first book is that their banter, their back and forth, the Deuceman, because he was a really good like sounding board for her when she was trying to like figure things out. And her friend, who was obviously there every step of the way because it was his brother who was missing, was not the same. And so she also felt very frustrated with him sometimes, because she was like, well, if Robbie was here, we would have figured things out like maybe faster, stuff like that. And I felt the same way. And the other thing I really like about this book is how it provided an actual conclusion to the first book, because the first book made, you know, everything was concluded in terms of finding who it was, like, you know, the suspect, murder, everything like that. But in terms of the court case, like the verdict, that this was actually where it was actually concluded. So I really like that. So now I cannot wait to read the third book. I already have it on library on hold because it's really popular, and even though I do have the physical copy, I want to listen to audiobook because the audiobook is such a fascinating experience. So if you get a chance, definitely listen to this on audiobook. I highly recommend that way instead. The next book slash books that I picked up is a trilogy, and that is the Imperium trilogy. This is book number 1, which I gave 4.5 stars. Then I gave Kingsbane 3 stars, and then finally the last book that I gave, Lightbringer, which I gave 3.5 stars. This series basically follows two queens who are separated by 1,000 years. It follows Riel, who was born with the power of all the elements, but she grew up trying to suppress them all, and one day her powers explode, and now she is faced with these trials to prove that she is in fact the Sun Queen and not the Blood Queen due to a prophecy. At the same time, she is also trying to resist Corian, who is an angel who is trying to seek his revenge against the humans for betraying his kind many years ago, where basically the humans trapped the angels into the deep and they lost their physical forms. And it also follows Ileana, who is an assassin trying to protect her family during the Empire's rule, and now she has to face her own trials when she finds out who exactly is behind the Empire and who the Emperor is, and how everything has been culminating for the past 1,000 years. The first book was by far the strongest. This is why I gave this book 4.5 stars, with the second book being the weakest and the final book just being an okay read overall. I felt like it just wrapped things up, but it was not the satisfying ending that I wanted. The characters are honestly so unlikable, especially Riel. I thought that she was unlikable in the first book, but then as the story progresses, like in the second and third book, she'll redeem herself, and that was never the case. She continued and remained unlikable. I just couldn't deal with her issues because she constantly felt like she was better than everyone else, and she felt a need to constantly prove to everyone that she was in fact better. And I just was so aggravated by her because everyone is, you know, like everyone's trying to look for her for help, and she is just like not helping them because she's like, well, I'm better, I'm superior, etc. And I just did not like her attitude at all. And then in regards to Ileana, I actually liked her in this first book, but then as the story progressed, she became more unlikable. Like, I didn't even know that was possible, but she did, and I was not a fan of her really at the end. Remy and Simon were the other two like very big characters, and Remy was by far my favorite. He was just so endearing, and I just liked how he kept things going and he always had hope. Simon, on the other hand, just faced so much, and I just felt really bad for him. Like, especially in the third book when you find out like more about his history, you see like how broken he is, and I just felt so bad. So like the characters itself, like, I mean, in terms of like a reaction to the characters, I felt like the author obviously did a good job because I did not like some of them, I liked some of them, I felt bad for one of them. So the author definitely did her job with invoking like emotions from me as a reader in terms of my relationship with the characters, but I still didn't like I just didn't like the characters. So overall, the series was just okay, and I talked about this a lot more in my series vlog, so I'll link that above and down below in case you want to check that out. Then the next book that I picked up was actually from my book club, and that is The Maidens, which I gave 3 stars. This book follows a therapist. Her name is Mariana, where she is so sure that the murderer was in fact the professor. And she becomes invested when one of the students, who also happened to be her niece's best friend, was found murdered. And she soon becomes very obsessed with proving to everyone that it was in fact the professor despite his alibi. And soon she starts to spiral out of control. All I can say is that my book club had a lot to say about this book, and not all of them good things. We all thought it was this one person due to a lot of clues that were presented throughout the book, and apparently also when there was this like one big clue towards like the end, if you had listened to an audiobook, the narrator who did that one big clue, their voice apparently, or like their accent, matched this other character. Like it was in line with who we all thought, and that was actually like super deceiving because it was obviously not that person. So you know, like we were so sure about this one character and we were all proven wrong. And the ending, like who the actual person was so unexpected, because it was one of those endings where, you know, like sometimes authors do this, especially in thrillers, where they would just like pull a random person in and be like, oh, actually it was this person, and you're like, this person showed up for like 5 seconds, like how the heck would we have known that this was the person? Like this is not all what was presented to us throughout the entire book. And I felt like that was similar in this book, and it sucked because it literally just came out of left field where we were just like, it just made no sense, I think. But what was really shocking to me was afterward, when I was talking about it to one of the girls, we found out, or she told me, I found out that the Theo that was mentioned in this book is actually the same Theo in The Silent Patient, which is so crazy because if you have read The Silent Patient, you would know who Theo is and his roles in that book, and I feel like that's just psycho. So that was like the biggest reveal for me, honestly. Like it was a better reveal for me for that than the actual culprit of this book. So that just kind of goes to show like how middle of the lane of book this is for me. Then this next book that I picked up is Take a Hint, Danny Brown, which I gave 3.5 stars. This is the second book in the series where it follows the middle sister. Her name is Danny, and all she wants is to find the perfect friends with benefits with no strings attached. And somehow she ends up with the security guard at her job, except Zafir, who's security guard, has been into Danny this entire time. So before long, the two of them are doing all the date couple things, and she soon realizes that maybe she actually wants more. I didn't really enjoy this book as much as I thought I was going to, especially because I enjoyed the first book so much. For some reason, I just thought the romance was cute, but it was like nothing crazy, nothing special. But for some reason, people like this book more than the first one. So I don't know, like maybe I just connected with the first character, like Chloe, more than I did with her. But whatever the case is, I definitely prefer the first book over this book. The one thing I did like about this book more than the first book though was the conflict at the end, because the first book had this really weird conflict that seemed to come out of nowhere, and it felt like it was very dramatic. For this book, the conflict that occurred felt very realistic, and it felt like it was a lot smoother and natural with how it was presented and dealt with, and I liked that a lot more. All right, moving on to the last and final book for this video, and that is A Hero of Ages, which I gave 4 stars. This is the final book in the original Mistborn trilogy, and it takes place right after the second book, where Vin now needs to figure out what actually needs to be done in terms of the mist and the deepness. I definitely discuss this a lot more in detail in my series vlog, so I will link that above and down below in case you want to check that out. But this is a book where I realized too late that I definitely need to read this physically and not through an audiobook, because by the time I picked up physically, it was too late. I felt like I already had a disconnect with the story and the characters, which was shocking because for the second book I thought it was fine, but I think like I feel like the book would have been a lot better for me and I would have absorbed it a lot better if I had picked it up physically from the start. Like the audiobook is nice, but it was very easy to lose focus in it, and I love the plot twist in this book, especially about the mist. If you know what I'm talking about. But that plot twist was just something else, and it was very heartwarming and I just loved it. But then in terms of the ending, it was bittersweet, and it was not the most satisfying ending, but it made sense and it was very realistic. So there is that. So anyways, I thought to say for this video in terms of my March wrap up, it was kind of a big video this time around. A lot of books that I read. I'm hoping that April and the continuing months will be the same, because I have so many books I want to read and just not enough time. I feel like I've been primarily focusing or like prioritizing more like shows these days, so not the greatest, but it is what it is. Let me know down below if you have read any of the books that I read this past month. What are you guys planning to read for April? I did my whole April TBR, which I will link above it down below in case you want to check that out. But as always, if you like this video, please do give me a thumbs up. It really does help out my channel, and if you want to see more content of me, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below. And as always, feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.